In any general chemistry course, you will find yourself sooner or later in a laboratory. You will have typically a drawer full of all sorts of stuff, and oftentimes you'll be sharing it with other lab groups. And it's a good idea to know what these things are. So let's take a look at common glassware and equipment. Tell me what each item is. Now we'll be going typically in rows, and I'll occasionally go out of order, but here we go. Yes, that is a Bunsen burner. This is something you put a crucible on when things need to get red hot. We call it a clay triangle or a pipe stem triangle. Here is a dish that is good for evaporating. So this is an evaporating dish. These are typically either glass or white porcelain. I'll bet you know that that's a test tube of various sizes. There's a beaker. Great for pouring, lousy for stirring. Here's a bottle. Okay. Clamping things is always very important, so you have control. When things have round bottoms, you can't just sit them down. So we need a ring stand. We need a utility clamp. We might need a iron ring, or an iron ring that clamp those things down. You typically can use that for funnels, things like that. Here's some medieval tools. We need our mortar and pestle. Mortar, pestle. To melt high melting things, iron and magnesium and things that just need wicked high temperatures, we can use a crucible. And there's its cover, which you probably shouldn't touch with your bare hands. Probably to here, those the goggles. No, we went down to the little pipette there. And perhaps here they call this a wire gauze. Absolutely got to wear your goggles at all times. You can seal things up like these flasks with corks, but be careful if you do. Your professor will probably say never heat a closed system. And on day one, when you walk into the lab, you might want to look on the ceiling to see if anybody's ever violated that rule at their peril. Here's another, what I would just call an evaporating dish, but you could also call it a watch glass. This is a Erlenmeyer Flask. Great for stirring, not as good for pouring. It doesn't have that cute little spout. You can swirl that in your bare hands, works great for that. Probably to here, you recognize that as the thermometer, but we didn't go there. Where did we go? Ah, we're up here. Now these are almost certainly not in your lab, but you should recognize this as a balance. You'll typically have access to 3-digit, that's milligram accuracy electronic balances. Test tube holder right there. Once again, a lab burner. We got to be going down here now. This is a thermometer. You probably recognize this as a graduated cylinder, but we didn't go there. Wash bottle, sorry. How about here? This looks like just a dropper, right? And here we have a pair of forceps. This gets used for titrations. We call this a burette. Next is the graduated cylinder. How about these? These, you need a lot of these. These are oftentimes disposable micropipettes. They have little graduations on them. They're just cheap, clear plastic and very handy. This looks like a triangular file. Oh, I don't know if it gets mentioned, but this is great for if you put a little cut in any of this heat-treated glassware, you can cut it nice and cleanly. So they typically have these in your drawer. Let's see, we are now at those right here. Nice to know the difference between a spatula and a scoopula. See that? Spatula, scoopula for scooping. I'm guessing we're going here now. This is a funnel. If it has a wide bottom, they call it a powder funnel. There's your test tube rack. Here's your 96 well plate, although that's not 96, 24 well plate. These are great for robotics, great for quick checks, very handy. There's your scoopula. And I believe we are now, well, that didn't get mentioned, so there it is, the file. Okay, you will certainly at some point in general chemistry be performing distillation, so it's good to know the gear here. I think it goes from the top down. So this is for separation of soluble liquid-liquid mixtures, like for example ethanol and water, things like that. And at the top, this is a quantitative instrument and can be used for identification because it has a thermometer. The hot liquid will boil, turn to a gas, register its boiling point, proceed down here, and it would just come out as steam or in its gaseous form unless you condense it using a condenser. And this is typically just an external jacket through which you have cold water. Now when you set that thing up, don't put the water in there because all it will do is flow along the bottom. Stick the water in here, so it must fill up before it can exit. Water in, water out. You can heat it up various ways. A lot of professors like to use sand baths, but there's electrical devices known as heating mantles that are handy. And sooner or later you got to collect that stuff, so we'll call that our collection flask. Continuing, there's another Erlenmeyer flask. This looks like a two-necked round-bottom flask, a one-necked round-bottom flask. These are great for vacuum distillation, so you can vacuum filtration. You can either stick a funnel on this thing and put in a piece of filter paper and let it drip ever so slowly. But if you can seal it up and apply a vacuum here, well, you can perform your filtration in 2 seconds rather than 10 minutes. So that's either called typically, I guess, a sidearm flask or a filter flask. That's fine. There's your funnel with the short stem. We've seen beakers before. Ah, wide stem. I'll bet they call it a powder funnel. This is great for separating insoluble liquid-liquid mixtures like oil and water because as the bottom layer drips down, it gets super fine there and you can separate it easily to the drop. So rather than decanting, using a separatory funnel is great. This is a small device that goes right there, so you get an airtight seal, especially if you use one of these in between. And for vacuum filtration, a Hirsch funnel is very handy. For larger quantities, the Buchner funnel is very handy. Check out the umlauts. And if you want to boil something and not have it evaporate, why not stick a condenser on the top? That way the gases that form will drip right back down. They call that refluxing, to continuously be able to boil something. So this would be known as a reflux condenser, otherwise known as a West condenser. You could also stick in something right here. This is simple distillation. You're not going to get a whole lot of opportunity for these liquids to separate. But if you stick something in that has a lot of surface area and let it go way up, then you can get what they call fractional distillation. It just works better. Now this column here might go by the name Vigro column or distillation column. Yeah, distilling column. There we are. This looks like what's known as a Claisen Adapter, and this is suppose you're doing some reflux, so you've got a condenser attached there, but you need to drip something in to do a chemical reaction. Makes sense, right? You can attach this there, the condenser there, and you are set up to do a chemical reaction, so the Claisen Adapter is very handy. Here's this part right here. Do you see that? So you'd attach your round bottom flask there, your condenser there, your thermometer there. So what kind of an adapter is that? It's a distillation adapter. There it is. And you can have your stuff collect here, but if you want to get fancy, make it all airtight. There and there. Put your round bottom flask there with its ground glass joint so that it seals nicely. And right there, you apply a vacuum. Either a small vacuum by just using a water aspirator, which you probably will use in general chemistry. That's just squirting out some water and generate a vacuum that way through its flow. Or maybe you'll have access to a real vacuum pump. In either way, it can change the distillation. I should say the boiling point can go way down. You can boil water at room temperature with one of these. They will call this a vacuum adapter. Yeah. Better use this for your vacuum filtration, otherwise you won't get a good seal with either your Hirsch or your Buchner funnel, so they just call that a filter adapter. It's a piece of rubber like that. If things need to stay dry, I don't know if this one shows up. We're probably going here yet. This looks like another clamp. And here is the clamp holder, right? Because the clamp goes in it. So this goes on the ring stand right there, and you could stick whatever you want to it. And perhaps you want to put a simple clamp on that. Or maybe you want a drying tube here. I don't know if that showed up. It did not. That is a drying tube. All right, do a few laps here until you know all the chemistry lab equipment.